On that Friday, the terminal was as crowded as any international airport before a long weekend. People hurried between gates, suitcases rolled on polished floors, children cried, and voices overlapped. Amid the rush and noise, Audrey Hayes remained calm. Nearly 50 years old, she was the kind of woman who didn't need to announce who she was to be noticed. With well-groomed hair, impeccable posture, and discreet but tasteful clothing, she waited patiently in the United Airlines priority boarding line for Chicago, returning from a 3-day legal conference. Her leather briefcase contained notes, confidential documents, and a laptop with drafts of opinions for the coming week. To those passing by, she appeared to be just another high-ranking professional. But what no one knew was that Audrey was the chief judge of the Federal Court of Appeals. And at that moment, even with all her authority, she was still just a black woman trying to board. 2 people behind her in the line, Abigail Prescott couldn't hide her discomfort. With her perfectly made-up face, diamond necklaces and designer blazer, everything about her screamed privilege. She observed Audrey with a mixture of disdain and mistrust. Her eyes scanned every detail of the other woman, as if searching for something out of place, some loophole to validate her prejudice. When it was Audrey's turn to present her ticket and identification, Abigail stepped forward, interrupting with a tone mixing indignation and feigned concern. She said aloud, loud enough for everyone to hear, that this lady was in the wrong line. She insinuated, without stating directly, that the ticket was fake, or that perhaps it wasn't even hers. The gate agent hesitated for a moment, disconcerted by the situation, but it only took Abigail's insistent look and a few carefully chosen words. People who try to impersonate others. Security. We need to be vigilant these days, to trigger the protocol. The officers appeared a few minutes later. Dave Riley arrived first, adjusting his belt with the air of a veteran and a bored expression, as if he already knew exactly what to do. Sean Baxter came right behind, younger, with the kind of energy that came not from experience but from impulsiveness. Abigail greeted them as if they were old acquaintances, discreetly pointing at Audrey and reinforcing the same veiled suspicions. "I found it strange, you know. These days, anything is possible," she said, casting a look loaded with meaning. Riley approached the judge with a chilly courtesy, asking for her ID and boarding pass with rehearsed formality. Audrey, although surprised, handed over both calmly without altering her tone of voice. When she asked why she was being stopped, all she heard was, "It's standard procedure in light of worrisome reports." Baxter, restless, was already eyeing her bag as if expecting to find something illicit hidden inside. Audrey responded with serenity, but her eyes already read the script of the situation. She knew where this could lead. When Riley, in a not-so-subtle manner, asked how she had obtained that ticket and whether the card used was indeed hers, the thin line between suspicion and offense was crossed. She slightly raised her chin and replied firmly that she was a federal judge and demanded the names and badge numbers of the 2 officers. The request did not sit well. Baxter crossed his arms and huffed. Riley, trying to maintain control, ironically remarked that everyone becomes something important when they're in trouble. The atmosphere changed. The audience began to notice the tension, and some people discreetly pulled out their cell phones. Audrey, even as she felt the embarrassment growing, remained upright. But inside her, an old pain mingled with indignation. She had experienced smaller versions of that moment before. Glances, assumptions, inappropriate questions, but never to this extent. And she knew it wasn't about security, it was about control. The moment when Riley asked Audrey to accompany him was when the situation crossed the line. She refused, stating that there was no legal reason for her to be removed from the boarding gate. Baxter immediately stepped forward, hand already on his holster, creating an atmosphere of intimidation. The crowd watched in silence, some shocked, others merely curious. Audrey kept her shoulders straight, but her eyes no longer hid her frustration. When she said that this was an abuse of authority and demanded to call a supervisor, Riley did not respond. He merely nodded, and Baxter snapped on the handcuffs. The cold click of metal on her wrists echoed louder than any announcement over the loudspeaker. Audrey was turned around without resistance in front of dozens of passengers. There was no struggle, only embarrassment. The black woman with a firm posture, who moments earlier was reviewing opinions on her cell phone, was now being led through the corridors like a criminal. Abigail, at the back, watched everything with a look of satisfaction, as if witnessing the confirmation of a hunch. Meanwhile, the officers escorted Audrey through the airport corridors, ignoring the protests of some passengers who began murmuring about the exaggeration of the situation. On the way to the police station, Riley asked acidic questions, as if trying to provoke her. "What is your job again? Have you ever been arrested before?" Audrey did not answer. Silence was her only defense at that moment. At the station, while the officers began the record protocol, taking her purse, cell phone, and personal belongings, she remained completely silent. Only when they asked her to state her profession for the form did she look up and say, in a clear and unhurried voice, "Chief Judge of the Federal Court of Appeals." What followed was a disconcerting silence. Riley stopped typing. Baxter stared at the floor. The weight of the phrase fell like a sentence. The atmosphere at the police station changed drastically. Riley, who until seconds before maintained airs of superiority, went pale. Baxter tried to confirm if she was serious, but a single look into her eyes made it clear that there was no room for doubt. Audrey demanded that the head of airport security be called immediately, along with representatives from the U.S. Marshals and the Federal Court Administration. No one dared refuse. A murmur spread through the room. The radio was activated, phone calls began to be made, and in less than 20 minutes, the small room turned into an epicenter of institutional tension. When the head of security arrived, visibly nervous, she looked him directly in the eyes and said that she would demand a formal investigation for the violation of civil rights. The two officers now stood leaning against the wall, unarmed, silent, looking at each other as if expecting to wake up from a nightmare. The power they had arbitrarily exercised was now slipping from their hands. As news spread through the airport, more authorities arrived. Representatives from the Department of Justice, members of the local court, lawyers, and even airline employees began circulating in the restricted area. The episode, which began with unfounded suspicion, turned into an internal diplomatic emergency. Audrey maintained her composure the entire time, refusing to sit or accept any kind of informal excuse. She was not there to be the exception treated with care after a mistake. She was there to demand that the mistake not be repeated. When asked if she wished to sue the officers individually, she merely replied that the case would follow the proper legal procedures. Everything would be done as mandated by the Constitution, word for word. Riley and Baxter, now suspended, would be indicted for violation of civil rights while in custody, and Abigail Prescott. Her identity was recorded, and she would be summoned for incitement and filing a false report. The scenario had completely reversed. What unfolded in the following hours was a complete damage control operation. Airport management cancelled appointments, federal authorities made meticulous records, and the airline itself issued a written apology later that afternoon. But Audrey wasn't interested in formal apologies. The wound didn't stem solely from the gesture, it came from the ease with which it was carried out. She stayed there for more than 3 hours, following every step of the process, demanding access to camera footage, incident reports, and radio recordings. Her presence in that environment now made everyone uncomfortable, but it was a necessary discomfort. No one moved carelessly. No one dared address her with the same tone they had heard from Abigail hours earlier. The irony was evident. It was enough for her to state her title for the world around her to recognize her worth. And yet what bothered her most was knowing that if it had been any other black woman without a prestigious position, all of this would have ended with a criminal record, perhaps even with violence. The next morning, the story was already in the press. The arrest video was circulating on social media, along with leaked excerpts revealing Audrey's position. The images clearly showed the moment of handcuffing, the cold stare of the police, and the discomfort of those watching, unsure of what to do. Her name, now highlighted in the news, was accompanied by headlines such as "Federal Judge Unjustly Arrested at Airport" and "Authorities Detain Black Magistrate After Unfounded Report." But despite the exposure, Audrey wasn't seeking revenge. Her focus was on real accountability, on setting a precedent that could prevent other cases like hers. Riley and Baxter were indicted for civil rights violations and abuse of authority, and the trial proceeded at an accelerated pace, driven by national attention. Both were sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. Meanwhile, Abigail, pressured by her lawyers and threatened with multiple lawsuits, accepted a settlement, $500,000 in fines, and a public retraction for incitement and false reporting. No punishment could erase what had happened, but there was justice in seeing the system respond. And that, for Audrey, was what made it all worthwhile. She returned to work the following Monday, as she always had, punctual, focused, discreet. She didn't need to recount what she had experienced. Those who knew, knew, and those who didn't would soon understand that dignity has no appearance, but when it is put to the test and stands firm, it transforms into power.